Hi, Stuart here. Today, the first in a series of videos about Postgres. I've been working on a project this is the GitHub for it, on using Postgres to build an enterprise durable queue. Part of that, I needed to have a stable version of Postgres in Docker just so I had a convenient container to work on, and I wanted to leverage the Citrus Data plugin pgcron. I thought to myself, how hard can this be? Well, turns out it's incredibly hard. I threw hours and hours at trying to get this thing to work, and the experience was so painful, I thought what I needed to do was A, when I got it working, put it into GitHub, and B, share it with all of you on YouTube so that you could go and pull my code and customize it and take it your own direction. Even if you weren't interested in my enterprise queue project, the technique would work to get other plugins in Postgres going and sort of show off some tricks and techniques and other things that I had to do in order to customize my Postgres container experience. Now, let me be clear that the out-of-the-box containers provided by the group that maintains them for Postgres, the official container, they're fantastic. I mean, they're stable, they're lovely, they're wonderful. I have no complaints. But if you want to do something outside of the box a little bit, there really aren't a lot of step-by-step instructions. And so I'm hoping that this will sort of contribute to the body of knowledge that will help people who are trying to go just one step beyond what comes out of the box to do some happy things. If you have problems or comments, please do jump into my GitHub, and if it's an issue, make an issue, or you can, if you have thoughts, post a discussion in the GitHub, and I welcome community participation feedback. Thank you very much. And so let's get right into some code. I pulled the repo to my favorite place on disk. In my case, it's C code, but it could be anywhere. None of the scripts are particularly location dependent. They all use relative paths to the root of the Git repository. So as long as your PowerShell execution is from the root of the container, wherever the container is. In this case, when I pulled my Git, I made it in a place called Code.ps1 stands for Postgres Enterprise Queue, because again, that's the super project I was working on. Here is my PowerShell. That's your place to start. I have a certain style and convention I use. It's a little different than the Microsoft one, but I use it and reuse it pretty much for all of my PowerShell scripting. There are some good nuggets in here, at least I hope so. So you can see that I have just a style. I'm using VS Code to edit my PowerShell. I like to put all of my sort of script level variables up at the top where I can maintain them. None of the things for my container are particularly secret, so I make no bones about the password I'm using when I set up Postgres, for example. I'm somewhat absent-minded, so there are times when I go to run this and I haven't actually started Docker running. With a little bit of work, you could get this to run with any container engine, but essentially what we do here is I make sure that the thing is stopped, set some script environment level passwords with setx, and setx is actually going to make it so if I open and close the shell, it's going to remember it. You can comment these things out, these two lines out. They're not strictly speaking necessary as long as these two variables are alive for the duration of the script. I make some relative paths off of wherever I am now, right? So again, as long as you're executing the start script from the root of place where you pulled the repository from, PS script root will be in the right place, and hence source and data will be mapped relative to the place. I make a pgpass file. You can read all about pgpass in the Postgres documentation, but essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating, localhost 5432, master database is Postgres, username is Postgres, and password is password123- in Postgres. And there are a number of Postgres commands, especially the command line utilities that are in the Postgres bin directory that will go and look in here first, and that saves you from having to type in a whole bunch of command line things. A little later on, we'll show you how to make sure that you set the environment variable for this so that the Postgres commands can find this file. But this is just a nice shortcut. Again, I'm working in a container. I would never do this in production, at least not this way. But again, I just want a fast development environment that's reproducible, that's stable, that always starts from a known good place. So I create, the pgpass file every single time the script runs. I also check it into source control because, again, the fact the password's exposed is irrelevant to my use case. And then I have a little handy block of code, this block of code, that turns my Windows terminated files into Linux, Unix terminated files. And this little snippet of code on line 95 is the secret sauce to make sure you don't get all kinds of weird errors when you copy things over into your Docker image during the image building process, or whether you're executing a script that then copies files into your running image to make sure that they actually run and don't puke. So I typically, if I'm working with, images that are running in Linux, I typically will make a list of the files to patch. Even if I think I may or may not use them, I will make sure that if they're going to get copied to the image, that they get linified essentially with this little piece of snippet. The other thing I do in my use case is I destroy the PG data folder, which gives Postgres amnesia every time I run the start script, forcing on Postgres on startup will create the master database Postgres from scratch. It gives it amnesia every time. If you want to invoke your Postgres instance, if you want to start it every time and have it remember what you did since last time, comment this out. Be aware that if you jump between Windows and WSL and Linux, that there are some quirks about having PG data on the Windows path. But again, for my use case, I'm quite happy to have Postgres start from a known good state, the system initialization, every single time. The next thing I do is from a known good pinned image, I do a build using a custom Docker build file. So let's go look at my Docker, see what I'm doing. Again, it's very, very simple, but it took me an inordinate number of hours to get the nuances of this file correct so that not only could I get a stable version of Postgres, which is as simple as just grabbing the Postgres at the image level I wanted. And here the combination of the various libraries that I want to work together, I was very specific in my label to pin it to 16 Trixie. And that's important because a lot of the other things that I'm doing are really specific to 16 Trixie. And it turns out that the minor version of Postgres 16 didn't matter. So I didn't have to do like 16-3 or whatever. 16 Trixie seems to work just fine. But 17 didn't work and 15 didn't work and just Postgres latest didn't work. So again, one of the secrets to happiness if you're trying to have a stable system, particularly if you're going to be sharing this with other developers as I am, is determine the level of specificity in your from line that works for your scenario and then have a bunch of other people test it. In this case, I had a bunch of friends go pull my repo and try this over and over until it worked for, my 3 or 4 friends who very kindly threw hours at testing this once, because I'd say, oh, I've got it this time for sure. And they'd be like, no. So thank you to them. They asked not to be named, so I won't name them. But it's pretty simple. Like I go get it and I run update and upgrade. I go get curl and CA certificates and cron packages, which are not part of the Trixie build, or if they are, they may not be fully upgraded. And then, of course, I want to go get PG cron, and specifically, I don't want to go get the generic package, sort of the package manager equivalent of, latest, like in Docker. I want to go get PG cron pinned to 16. because that's what works with 16 Trixie. And again, I tried a bunch of combinations and was deeply unhappy till I got this. So then I go and I get and install the package, and then I need the pgpass installed and correctly configured, right? So one of the things that is really aggravating is until Postgres starts for the first time, certain folders don't exist. So I do a make dir -p. You'll see this in the various script elements quite a bit. And this is just -p says if it doesn't exist, make it exist and make the whole path exist. So it'll go, does var exist? It does. Okay, lib exists. Yes. Postgres. Oh, it doesn't. I'll make it. Does data exist? Oh, no, it doesn't. I'll make it. And this is, in my opinion, the greatest cheat code ever. And then I copy the pgpass file, which, as you'll remember, we have linified at this point, right? And then I set the appropriate permissions on it by chmodding it. And this is vital because it took me forever to figure out why my Postgres bin commands weren't running. And they weren't running because pgpass won't be recognized if the bits are not set correctly in the permission mask for the file. So that is done. And then I do the same for pgdata, and I copy a configuration script, which is run after Postgres starts for the first time, which will customize Postgres, and I'll show you that in a minute. And again, I need to chmod some things, and then I need to customize the out-of-the-box Postgres configuration. But again, Postgres hasn't started for the first time, so I have to copy it to my image in a place that I know exists. Why do I know it exists? Because I make dir -p that place. And that file is going to be there, sitting there waiting for a future step. And again, I have to make sure it has the right permissions on it, or it no worky. And then I need to set some environment variables, or Postgres, when it starts, will be grumpy. So that's the Dockerfile. So that will run, and the output of that will be that I will end up with a custom image named custom image name. And if we go up to the top here, you can see that that custom image name is called Postgres_cron. So that is the custom image name that comes out of Docker build. And now I run Docker and I set a bunch of environment variables specifically so that Postgres on its first time startup will do all the right things. So I say, look, your user is this, your password is this, the magic pgpass file is here, I want your data folder to live somewhere different. Specifically, I want it to live on the mapped shared volume that I'm going to define a couple lines down. Obviously, there's some Docker commands, and here's a really important one that frustrated the daylights out of me. Later on, we have to go and add pgcron to the bottom of the Postgres configuration file, but just getting it to reload its configuration is insufficient. We have to actually restart the Postgres service itself. And I guess that's okay, except it's got this horrible side effect, and that is it restarts the Docker container. And by default, when you are Docker running something and it restarts the Docker container, or more importantly, the command shuts down the Docker container, what happens is it doesn't start back up again. And so the next script steps that try to connect to the container and do stuff fail. So you have to tell Docker that you wanted to restart the container. Always. I spent hours trying to figure out a better way. If anybody knows a better way, please post, and I will change the script, and my friends and I will test the daylights out of it, and I'll update the video. But for now, we're telling the Docker runtime to restart the container if the Docker process shuts down. We set what the port is, and obviously the port is the default port of 5432. Of course, I give my image a custom image name. Here's the other irritating thing. You would think that through health checks and other things that you'd be able to script a way of telling whether or not your Docker container, and more importantly, the inner Postgres service was up, stable, and ready to accept command. For the life of me, and again, hours of labor, my friends and I could not figure this out. So I did something horrible that works, and that is, I sleep for 30 seconds. 30 turned out to be the magic number that guaranteed it was running. And the reason that's important is that we need to finish setting up pgcron by telling Postgres, here is your plugin. There are many like it, but this one is yours, by running this script that we copied, right? Var lib, blah, 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 configure pg, sha. And in order to do that, we had to, it would fail if the container wasn't up and running and the Postgres server wasn't stable and accepting connection. So we just did something horrible and waited 30 seconds. If anybody has a absolutely rock solid way from PowerShell to figure out if a Docker's inner service is genuinely started that doesn't require 300 lines of PowerShell bash or some other abomination, I'm happy to take it as a pull request. And it does it in one line of PowerShell. So let's go look at what configure pg sha does. And I have tracing turned on. You can ignore that. But what is it doing is it's taking that boulderized cron file that is customized that you can go look at that adds the cron configuration for pgcron and adds it to the bottom of the Postgres default configuration file for 16. And I just checked it into source control, and we copy it over the top of the real one, which you'll see is actually located in var lib PostgreSQL data, PG data. Why? Because on startup, we told it we wanted its PG data folder to be somewhere else here. And there's a certain magic to this because we don't need to have special permissions or roles or anything, because Postgres will cheerfully run in any directory that is writable. And that is a directory that is absolutely writable by the Postgres service as it runs. And so we just told it to park its inner workings, which you can see up here if you want, but this is all the stuff that's made when Postgres starts. And so in here, we can just tell it to overwrite the configuration file. And now we need to tell Postgres to restart. Again, I would have preferred the pg control reload, which allegedly tells Postgres to reload its configuration and reconfigure itself. And unlike restart, which terminates all the running connections to Postgres, reload is supposed to not interrupt the connected users. Unfortunately, when we tried reload, and a bunch of us did this experiment, it did not detect the change in plugin configuration, which was super annoying. And so restarting, we will go. But of course, the problem with pg control restart is that it causes the outer Docker container to shut down. Hence, on startup, we have to tell it to restart always. And after that command executes in about 10 to 15 seconds, you have a running Postgres instance with the pgcron plugin ready to go. And you can then run your command, create extension if not exists. By the way, here's a little Postgres power tip. Greatest thing ever. Create if not exists. And you should do this for pretty much everything except probably procedures, where you want to have it almost always overwrite the existing procedure. And you can go read all about it by going to your favorite search engine and putting in and reading the Neon docs on how to use the pgcron extension. To that, you can go to the Citrus Data GitHub and you can get and see all the latest things. You can even see how it works. You can see the incredibly complicated way that Postgres handles plugins if you're really curious, but they also have some nice examples, and all these things are located in the README of my repository. Thank you for your kind attention.